I gave water to wounded Apache girl, and according to her tribe's laws, she says I am now her husband. The trail he was following was faint, barely visible under layers of sand and rock. He had been traveling for days, carrying supplies in his worn leather pack, hoping to reach the small settlement on the other side of the canyon before nightfall. The silence around him was almost complete, broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind through the sparse desert shrubs. He had grown used to the solitude, but it always left him alert, knowing the desert could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. As he walked, he thought about the stories he had heard from other travelers about this land. They spoke of vast canyons, hidden springs, and trails that could lead to life or death in equal measure. He had learned to trust his instincts, to move carefully, and to respect the power of the desert. His horse, a sturdy brown mare named Daisy, walked silently beside him, her hooves kicking up tiny clouds of dust. John patted her neck, grateful for her calm presence. She had been his companion on many journeys, and he knew he could rely on her when the path became difficult. It was just past noon when John noticed something unusual near a dry creek bed. At first, it was only a faint shadow among the rocks, and he thought it might be a coyote or some other desert animal. But then he heard a soft, desperate sound, a cry that seemed human. He stopped in his tracks, his heart quickening. The sound was weak, barely more than a whisper, but it carried urgency. John scanned the area carefully, looking for the source. As he approached, he saw a figure lying on the ground, partially hidden by a small cluster of rocks and sagebrush. It was a girl, no older than 16 or 17, dressed in worn, dusty clothing. Her skin was sunburned, and her hair was tangled and matted from days of exposure to the elements. She was breathing shallowly, and her lips were cracked and dry. Her eyes fluttered weakly as she tried to focus on him. John's heart sank at the sight. He had seen hardship before, but this level of suffering stirred a deep sense of compassion in him. He immediately reached into his pack, pulling out a canteen of water. "Here," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Drink, you need it." The girl looked at him with confusion, then relief as she struggled to take the canteen. John held it steady, careful not to spill any, until she drank enough to wet her parched throat. He could see her body trembling with exhaustion, and she winced as she tried to shift her weight. Her clothing was torn, and small cuts on her arms and legs were beginning to swell and redden. John quickly tore a piece of cloth from his own shirt and used it to clean her wounds as best he could. He worked carefully, trying not to cause her more pain. Where are you hurt?" he asked gently, noticing her hesitation. The girl shook her head weakly, unable to speak clearly. John realized she might be too weak from thirst and exposure to explain. He continued tending to her, giving her small sips of water and covering her with his spare jacket to protect her from the scorching sun. Slowly, her breathing began to even out, and her eyes focused more steadily on him. There was a mixture of fear and curiosity in her gaze, and John could sense that she was trying to understand who he was and why he was helping her. He spoke quietly, hoping to calm her. "You're safe now, don't worry. I won't let anything happen to you." The girl seemed to understand, though she did not respond in words. John realized that he would need to help her move to a safer place, somewhere with shade and water, before she could regain her strength. He looked around and spotted a small grove of mesquite trees a short distance away, where the ground was cooler and the sun less harsh. Carefully, he helped her to her feet, supporting her as they moved slowly toward the trees. Each step was a struggle for her, and he could feel her weakness in her trembling frame. As they reached the grove, John found a comfortable spot for her to sit, resting against the trunk of a tree. He laid out a small blanket from his pack and encouraged her to lie down. She obeyed, though her movements were stiff and slow. John continued offering water and tending to her cuts, using the little supplies he had. He knew he could not stay there forever, but he wanted to give her the best care he could until she was strong enough to move on her own. While she rested, John took a moment to observe her more closely. Her face was youthful but marked by hardship, and there was a quiet strength in her eyes despite the pain she had endured. He wondered how she had ended up alone in the desert, and whether she had family or friends who might be searching for her. The questions weighed heavily on him, but he knew the most important thing was her immediate safety and recovery. Hours passed, and the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert. The girl's breathing had stabilized, and she seemed more aware of her surroundings. She looked at John with a faint smile, as if to say thank you, though no words came. John felt a deep sense of responsibility for her. He realized that this was no longer just a simple act of kindness. It had become a duty. He had saved her life, and now he needed to protect her until she could stand on her own again. As evening approached, John built a small fire to keep warm and cook a simple meal from the supplies he carried. The girl watched silently, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. John tried to offer her some food, but she shook her head, still too weak to eat. He ate slowly himself, careful not to show fear or worry because he wanted her to feel safe and calm. The night was quiet, and the desert seemed almost peaceful compared to the harsh heat of the day. John stayed awake for much of the night, keeping watch over her. Every sound in the desert made him alert, but he felt a strange sense of calm knowing that she was nearby and alive. He could not help but feel that fate had brought them together in this vast, unforgiving land. A simple act of giving water, something so ordinary, had become a moment that might change both their lives forever. As dawn approached, the first light of morning spilled over the horizon, illuminating the desert in soft gold and pink hues. The girl stirred, blinking at the new day. She looked at John, and though she could not yet speak, he sensed gratitude and trust in her gaze. John smiled gently, understanding that this small, fragile human being had become his responsibility, at least for now. He did not know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing with certainty: he would do everything in his power to keep her safe. And so, in the quiet desert dawn, a bond was formed, not through words, but through care, compassion, and the simplest of human acts, giving water to someone in need. Little did John know, this single moment would soon introduce him to a world of customs, traditions, and responsibilities that he could never have imagined, and it would mark the beginning of an extraordinary story that neither he nor the girl would ever forget. The morning air in. The desert was cool, a welcome change from the scorching heat of the previous day. John had stayed close to the girl through the night, watching over her as she slept fitfully, her face pale but calm. Now, as sunlight crept over the hills, the desert came alive with soft sounds, birds calling, the rustle of small animals in the shrubs, and the whisper of the wind. John felt a sense of relief. She had survived the night, and that alone was a small miracle in the harsh desert. The girl slowly opened her eyes, squinting at the sun. She looked at John, and for a moment there was silence between them. He smiled gently, not wanting to startle her. She returned a faint nod, as if acknowledging his presence. John offered her water again, and this time she drank more steadily. Her strength was returning slowly, though it was clear she was still weak and needed rest. John wondered where she had come from. She had no bag, no supplies, and no sign of anyone nearby. Her clothing was simple, worn, and dusty, suggesting she had been traveling or running from somewhere for some time. He tried to speak to her, asking simple questions. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice soft and calm. She hesitated, then pointed to herself and spoke a single word in a language he did not understand. John frowned, realizing she did not speak English well, if at all. He tried to gesture, using hand motions to indicate his questions, but she only looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Despite the language barrier, John felt a strange connection forming. Her trust in him, shown through her willingness to accept his help, was something he could understand even without words. He knew he had to be patient and careful, as any sudden movement or demand might frighten her. As the day progressed, John realized he needed to make a plan. They could not stay in the open desert forever. Water and food were limited, and he had no way of knowing if anyone was searching for her. He looked around the area, noting the sparse vegetation and the small grove of mesquite trees where they had rested the previous day. It was safe for now, but he knew it was not a permanent solution. While thinking, he noticed movement in the distance, a group of figures walking along a ridge. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be her family, or perhaps other travelers? He squinted, trying to make out their features, but the distance and the bright sunlight made it difficult. He stood slowly, keeping his movements calm, and called out gently, hoping to see if they were friendly. The girl instinctively moved closer to him, clinging to his side, her small hand finding his. The figures did not approach quickly. They seemed to be observing from a distance, cautious but deliberate. John's mind raced. He did not want to provoke any danger, but he also wanted to understand who these people were. He spoke to the girl softly, trying to reassure her. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear and uncertainty, and he realized just how alone and vulnerable she must feel. After a few moments, the figures began to descend the ridge. John could see now that they were members of her tribe. They were dressed in traditional clothing, and their movements were careful and respectful. They were watching her closely, and it became clear that they recognized her immediately. One of the elders stepped forward, a man with a weathered face and kind but firm eyes. He spoke in a language John could not understand, but the tone was calm. The girl responded quickly, speaking in her language, her words rapid and urgent. The elder listened, then turned his gaze toward John. Though John could not understand their conversation, he sensed that they were discussing him, his presence, his actions, and the help he had given. He felt a knot form in his stomach. He had acted out of kindness, but now he realized that his simple gesture might carry consequences he had never anticipated. The elder approached cautiously, and John stepped forward, raising his hands slightly in a peaceful gesture. He spoke in simple English, hoping to convey goodwill. "I only helped her," he said, his voice calm but steady. "She was hurt. She needed water. I meant no harm." The elder paused, observing John carefully. Then he gestured toward the girl, speaking to her in their language. She turned and looked at John, her eyes reflecting both fear and trust. John understood that he had to let her speak for herself, but the language barrier made everything more complicated. Still, he remained patient, watching as the small group discussed among themselves. After some time, the elder spoke to John, slowly and clearly, using gestures to aid understanding. John realized they were explaining something important, something about their customs. They were telling him that, according to their tribe's laws, a man who gives life-saving aid to a young woman can be considered responsible for her, sometimes in ways he had not expected. John listened carefully, trying to understand. The words were unfamiliar, but the meaning was becoming clear. His simple act of giving water had, in their eyes, created a bond that carried a serious responsibility. John felt a mix of surprise and concern. He had never intended to take on any such obligation. He had acted purely out of compassion, yet looking at the girl, he realized that she now saw him differently. There was a quiet trust in her eyes, a reliance that he could not ignore. He knew he had to navigate this situation with care, respecting their customs while also being honest about his own intentions. The girl moved closer to John, holding his hand gently. She spoke in her language, her voice soft but certain. John did not understand the words, but the tone was clear. She was expressing her belief that he was now bound to her in a way that her tribe recognized. He felt a lump in his throat, unsure of how to respond. He had never imagined that giving water to someone could lead to such a complex situation. Over the next few hours, John spent time observing the girl and her tribe. He noticed their customs, the way they spoke, the respect they showed to each other. It was a world very different from his own, but one that felt rich with meaning and structure. He realized that he needed to understand their ways if he was to act appropriately. Rushing or making assumptions could cause offense or harm. He spoke to the girl slowly, using simple gestures and words, trying to convey that he wanted to help her but was unsure of what was expected. She listened carefully, tilting her head and nodding at certain points. He could see that she was intelligent and aware, even if young. Her trust in him had grown, and she seemed to rely on his guidance and protection. This realization weighed heavily on him. He could not abandon her now. As evening approached, the tribe suggested that they would help her recover fully and guide John in understanding their customs. John agreed, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. He knew that this journey was no longer just about survival. It had become a path of learning, respect, and cultural understanding. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that his actions would affect not only the girl, but also her family and her entire community. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John sat near the girl and the elders. They shared quiet moments, the girl resting against him and the elders observing. John thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought him here. A simple act of giving water had created connections, obligations, and challenges he had never imagined. He felt gratitude for the opportunity to learn from them, to witness their way of life, and to grow as a person. In the darkness, the desert seemed calm and peaceful. John felt a bond forming, not just with the girl, but with a culture that had welcomed him cautiously, teaching him the weight of actions, the importance of respect, and the power of compassion. He knew that the days ahead would be filled with challenges, misunderstandings, and lessons. Yet, he also knew that this experience was shaping him in ways that would last a lifetime. As he drifted into a light sleep, John thought about the journey ahead. The girl was safe, the tribe had accepted him as a guest, and he had begun to understand the delicate balance of trust, honor, and responsibility. He realized that this moment, born from a simple act of kindness, was the beginning of an extraordinary story, one that would test his patience, courage, and heart. And though he did not yet know all the answers, he felt certain of one thing: he would protect her, learn from them, and honor the trust that had been placed in him. The next morning, John woke to the soft sounds of the desert stirring. Birds chirped quietly, and a light breeze moved through the sparse trees, carrying the scent of dry earth and sage. The girl, still weak but recovering steadily, was sitting under the shade of a mesquite tree, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at John and smiled faintly, the way someone smiles when they feel safe but still cautious. John returned the smile gently. He felt a strange mixture of responsibility and admiration. She had endured so much, and yet, despite her weakness, there was a quiet strength in her eyes that reminded him of the resilience of the desert itself. The tribe's elders had gathered around, speaking softly among themselves. John did not understand their language completely, but the tone of their conversation was serious. They were discussing him, their voices carrying a mixture of curiosity, caution, and authority. John realized that he was being watched closely, not with suspicion, but with a deep interest in his intentions. He understood that they were testing him in a way, measuring whether he respected their laws and traditions. As he approached the group, the elder who had first spoken to him yesterday stepped forward. His face was weathered, lined with years of experience, yet there was a calm wisdom in his eyes. He gestured for John to sit and then spoke slowly, pointing to the girl and then to John, repeating certain words and gestures. John watched carefully, piecing together their meaning. They were explaining their laws regarding care and protection. A man who saves a woman's life, they said, takes on a responsibility that goes beyond simple gratitude. He could not ignore this responsibility, nor could he treat it lightly. John listened, his mind racing. He had never imagined that helping someone would come with such serious expectations. In his own world, acts of kindness were often fleeting, appreciated but not binding. Here, however, the rules were different. They carried weight, history, and honor. He realized that he was in a delicate position. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made would be watched and judged. Misunderstanding their laws could bring dishonor or even conflict. The girl, sensing the tension, moved closer to John. She held his hand lightly, as if seeking reassurance. John looked into her eyes and saw gratitude and trust, but also the innocence of someone who had faced danger alone. He understood that she relied on him now, not just for physical safety, but for guidance in this unfamiliar and complex situation. He felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him, heavier than the pack on his back or the long miles of desert trail he had traveled. Over the course of the morning, John tried to communicate as best he could. He used gestures, simple words, and patient attention. He asked the girl questions, pointed to objects, and waited for her responses. Slowly, he began to understand her world a little better. She had been traveling, perhaps fleeing danger or searching for her family. Her tribe had strict customs about trust, honor, and protection, and these customs governed every action she and the elders expected from him. The elders observed quietly, watching how he interacted with the girl. John realized that they were assessing his character as much as teaching him the rules. They wanted to see if he could act with patience, respect, and understanding. He knew he had to remain calm and careful, even though the situation was stressful. Every word mattered, every gesture carried significance. He could not rush, could not impose his own ways, and could not show frustration. To do so would be to disrespect them and risk breaking the fragile trust that had been established. By midday, John and the girl had moved to a small shaded area near a stream. He had helped her stand, supporting her weak frame, and now she was able to take small steps with his guidance. She walked carefully, glancing at him for reassurance, and he felt a sense of pride mixed with worry. She was stronger now, but she was still vulnerable. He thought about the dangers that lay ahead. The desert was vast, and help from others was uncertain. Yet, in that moment, he also recognized the resilience and courage that had brought her this far. The elders joined them at the stream, and one of the women in the group began to show John how they cared for the girl's wounds. She moved with careful, practiced motions, demonstrating how to clean the cuts, apply herbs, and wrap them gently. John watched intently, taking mental notes. He realized that the tribe's methods were effective and rooted in generations of knowledge. He had much to learn, and he wanted to learn it. The girl watched as well, her expression serious but attentive, and John could see that she was beginning to understand the deep bond between healer and patient, between protector and protected. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, John felt a growing awareness of the cultural gap between himself and the tribe. He understood the importance of respecting their traditions, even if they were unfamiliar to him. Saving the girl's life had created a link, but that link was not simple or casual. It was layered with meaning, expectation, and history. He realized that he could not take this responsibility lightly, nor could he act impulsively. Every action had to reflect respect, honor, and care. The girl, sensing his thoughts, leaned slightly against him, a gesture of trust that spoke louder than words. John felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of protectiveness, admiration, and a sense of obligation he had never experienced before. She had relied on him completely, and now he could not turn away. The desert around them, harsh and unforgiving, seemed less threatening with her by his side, yet he knew that the challenges ahead were just beginning. Later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the elder spoke to John again, this time with a mix of words and gestures that John could understand more clearly. They were explaining what would be expected of him if he continued to care for the girl. He would need to show respect, honesty, and patience. He would need to learn their ways, understand their customs, and honor their traditions. Failure to do so could bring dishonor not only to himself, but also to the girl and her family. John listened carefully, nodding, feeling the weight of their words. The girl watched the exchange silently, her eyes wide and attentive. John realized that she, too, understood the importance of what was being discussed. She looked to him for reassurance, and he offered a gentle smile. "I will do my best," he said softly, not fully knowing if his words would carry the same meaning in their language, but hoping that his tone conveyed sincerity. She nodded slightly, a small gesture of acceptance and trust. As evening fell, the group settled near the stream, creating a small campsite. John helped the girl lie down on a soft blanket, making sure she was comfortable. The elders gathered nearby, speaking quietly among themselves. John remained attentive, watching the girl as she drifted into a light sleep. He reflected on the events of the day, the unexpected responsibility that had been placed upon him, and the lessons he had begun to learn about trust, culture, and human connection. He realized that this experience was teaching him more than he could have imagined. It was showing him the depth of responsibility that comes with helping others, the importance of patience in understanding different ways of life, and the power of simple actions to create lasting consequences. A single act, offering water to someone in need, had transformed his journey into something far greater than survival or travel. It had become a test of character, empathy, and respect. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, John sat quietly, feeling a profound sense of purpose. The girl slept peacefully nearby, her breathing even, and he knew that she was safe for the moment. He thought about the challenges that lay ahead, the lessons he still needed to learn, the misunderstandings that might arise, and the delicate balance he would need to maintain between compassion and respect. Yet, despite the uncertainty, he felt ready. He understood that the bond formed through care and kindness was not just personal. It was a connection to a culture, a set of traditions, and a community that valued honor and responsibility above all. He knew that his actions would be watched and remembered, and that every decision he made could affect not only the girl but also her family and tribe. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was not something he could ignore or avoid. And so, in the quiet of the desert night, John made a silent promise. He would protect her, learn from the elders, and honor the trust that had been placed in him. He understood that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, but he also knew that it would shape him in ways he had never imagined. A simple act of kindness had become the beginning of a story far larger than himself, a story of trust, culture, and the extraordinary power of human connection. The days passed slowly, yet each one seemed filled with lessons and small discoveries. John woke early every morning, the desert air crisp and quiet, and immediately checked on the girl. She was resting, her strength returning gradually, though she still moved with care and hesitation. Her eyes often met his with a mixture of trust and curiosity, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing gently but firmly on his shoulders. He had helped her survive the desert, but now he realized that survival was only the beginning. Understanding her world, her culture, and the expectations placed on him by her tribe was the challenge that lay ahead. The elders continued to observe John closely. They spoke softly among themselves, and sometimes one of them would approach him to offer guidance, demonstrating small tasks or explaining customs with gestures, simple words, and careful patience. John tried his best to follow their instructions, realizing that each action carried significance. A simple mistake, using the wrong gesture, mispronouncing a word, or acting too quickly, could be interpreted as disrespect. The pressure weighed on him, but he approached each task with sincerity, knowing that honesty and effort mattered more than perfection. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high in the sky, John helped the girl gather water from a nearby stream. Her steps were steadier now, though she still leaned lightly on him for support. They moved slowly, stopping occasionally to rest. She pointed to small plants along the water's edge, and he realized she was teaching him how to identify edible herbs. It was a quiet lesson, shared without words, yet it deepened the bond between them. He marveled at her knowledge of the land and how instinctively she understood its dangers and gifts. The elders watched from a distance, approving of the patience and respect John displayed. One of them, the elder who had first spoken to him, approached with a small bundle of herbs. He gestured toward the girl, then toward John, and carefully demonstrated how the herbs could be used to heal minor cuts or soothe fatigue. John followed along, mimicking the motions, and the elder nodded slowly, clearly satisfied with his effort. This small act reinforced John's understanding. The girl's life was now tied to his attention, his care, and his willingness to learn. Evenings were the most reflective part of the day. John often sat by the fire, the girl resting nearby, and watched the stars appear one by one in the vast desert sky. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. John realized that the girl's trust in him was profound, yet he also understood the subtle pressure of expectation from the tribe. They were watching him, evaluating his intentions, his respect, and his patience. He could feel their eyes in every gesture he made, and it reminded him that his role was not just of a protector, but also a student of their ways. One evening, as the fire crackled and shadows danced on the sand, the girl spoke softly in her language. John could not understand the words, but her tone carried emotion, something between curiosity and concern. He held her hand gently, encouraging her to continue. She repeated the words, slowly this time, and he began to catch certain sounds that seemed consistent. Though he could not translate them fully, he understood the essence. She was expressing that he belonged to her in a way her tribe recognized. The realization struck him deeply. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had become a profound commitment, one that carried responsibilities he had never anticipated. John felt a knot of anxiety. He had saved her life, yes, but now he was learning that the act had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. The tribe's laws, unfamiliar to him, created a bond he could not easily break. The girl's gaze, filled with trust and hope, reminded him that he could not abandon her or treat the situation lightly. He realized that he must navigate this cultural landscape carefully, balancing respect for their customs with his own values and limitations. The days that followed were filled with small challenges. John helped the girl practice walking longer distances, teaching her to conserve her energy and watch for hazards. He assisted her in learning basic survival skills, like finding clean water, identifying safe plants, and avoiding dangerous terrain. Each step, each lesson, was an opportunity to strengthen their bond while also honoring the tribe's traditions. The elders observed quietly, offering guidance when necessary, and John noticed that their approval grew with each demonstration of patience and care. Yet the emotional strain was heavy. John felt conflicted between his desire to protect her and his uncertainty about the responsibilities the tribe's customs required. He often stayed awake late at night, thinking about the future, wondering if he could truly meet the expectations placed upon him. Could he continue to care for her as she deserved? Could he respect the tribe's laws while maintaining his own sense of autonomy? These questions weighed on him, but he knew that hesitation or withdrawal would betray the trust that had been placed in him. The girl, despite her youth, seemed to sense his inner struggle. She often offered small gestures of reassurance, a gentle smile, a hand on his arm, or a quiet look that said, "I trust you." These moments softened John's anxiety and reminded him why he could not turn away. Her resilience inspired him. She had faced danger alone, endured pain, and survived the desert. And now she relied on him not only for safety but also for guidance and understanding. One afternoon, the elder took John aside and spoke slowly, pointing to the girl and then to John himself. Though he could not understand every word, the tone and gestures conveyed a clear message. John must demonstrate his commitment through actions, not just words. Respect, patience, and care were the true measures of his responsibility. The girl's well-being depended on his consistent attention and understanding. John nodded, absorbing the lesson fully. He realized that trust could not be claimed through speech alone. It had to be proven through consistent, thoughtful action. As the sun set, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and pink, John reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few days. He had set out on a journey through the desert, expecting solitude and simple travel, but fate had introduced him to a girl in need and a world of customs far richer and more complex than he had imagined. The simplicity of offering water had transformed into a web of trust, duty, and learning. It was a responsibility he could not ignore, and it had already begun to shape his character in ways he had never experienced before. The girl lay resting near the fire, her breathing steady, and John sat close, thinking about the challenges ahead. He knew misunderstandings might arise, and he would need to maintain patience, humility, and respect at all times. Every action, every choice mattered. And yet, despite the weight of responsibility, he felt a quiet determination. He would honor the trust placed in him, protect the girl, and learn from her tribe's customs. Night fell completely, and the desert became a quiet, star-filled expanse. John felt the enormity of the responsibility resting on his shoulders, yet he also felt a deep sense of purpose. This journey, born from a single act of compassion, had become something far greater, a lesson in empathy, patience, and the power of human connection. He knew that the days ahead would challenge him emotionally, culturally, and physically, but he also understood that these challenges were an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to honor the bond that had been formed. As he drifted toward sleep, John made a silent promise to himself. He would act with care, respect, and patience. He would honor the girl's trust and the tribe's customs, and no matter how difficult the path became, he would not falter. This was no longer just about survival in the desert. It was about responsibility, learning, and the quiet power of compassion. The sun rose gently over the desert, casting soft light over the sand and the sparse greenery that dotted the landscape. John stirred awake, careful not to wake the girl, who slept peacefully nearby. Her breathing was steady, and her face had a calm expression, the kind of calm that comes only after a long struggle and a sense of safety. John watched her quietly, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and a deep sense of responsibility. The days of uncertainty, of learning and observing, had transformed into a routine of care, trust, and growing understanding. Yet he knew that today would mark a turning point, one that would test everything he had learned and everything he had promised himself. He rose and quietly prepared a small breakfast of bread and water, careful not to disturb the elders who had stayed nearby throughout the night. The desert was calm, almost serene, but John knew that challenges could arise at any moment. The girl awoke slowly, blinking in the soft sunlight, and looked at John. She smiled faintly, a small gesture that conveyed gratitude, trust, and something deeper, a quiet understanding between them that words could not fully express. John returned her smile, feeling warmth in his chest. She was strong, but her journey was not yet over. Neither was his. The elders approached, their movements calm and deliberate. One of them spoke gently, using simple gestures to communicate. John followed closely, paying attention to every motion, every subtle expression. They led him and the girl to a nearby shaded area where they could speak more privately. The elder gestured to John and then to the girl, emphasizing the importance of respect and understanding. He explained that the tribe valued balance between life and duty, kindness and responsibility, compassion and tradition. John listened carefully, realizing that their guidance was meant to ensure not only the girl's safety, but also the harmony between all involved. For the next few hours, John worked alongside the elders, learning more about the tribe's customs. They showed him how to prepare food, how to use natural remedies for injuries, and how to recognize the signs of danger in the desert. Every lesson was small but significant. He realized that each action he took carried meaning, not just for him and the girl, but for the entire community that trusted him. The girl watched closely, absorbing every detail, sometimes pointing out nuances that John had not noticed. Her knowledge of her culture was remarkable, and John admired her wisdom and attentiveness. As the day progressed, the elders decided it was time for a more serious discussion. They gestured for John and the girl to sit, and then spoke slowly, carefully ensuring that he understood the importance of what they were about to convey. John listened intently, feeling a mix of apprehension and respect. They explained that while his actions had created a bond with the girl according to tribal customs, there was a way to honor this bond without forcing a commitment beyond his capacity. Respect, patience, and continued care were essential, but they also acknowledged his autonomy as an outsider. John felt a wave of relief. He had feared that he might be bound in a way he could not fulfill, yet now he understood that honor could coexist with mutual understanding and compromise. The girl, sensing the tone of the conversation, leaned toward John and gently held his hand. Her eyes were filled with trust and quiet acceptance. She seemed to understand that while customs were important, John's intentions and efforts mattered more than any formal declaration. John felt a surge of emotion. He realized that this experience had transformed both of them. She had regained her strength, but more importantly, she had regained a sense of safety and agency. And he, through compassion, patience, and respect, had learned lessons about responsibility, culture, and human connection that would stay with him forever. Later, as the sun began its descent, painting the desert sky with shades of orange and pink, John helped the girl walk a short distance to a nearby hill. From this vantage point, they could see the vast expanse of desert stretching endlessly. The elders followed closely, observing silently. John felt a mixture of pride and humility. The journey they had undertaken together had been more than physical. It had been emotional, cultural, and deeply human. He thought about the days when he had first found her, weak and thirsty, and marveled at how far they had both come. The girl looked at him and spoke softly in her language. John could not understand every word, but her tone was clear. She was expressing gratitude, trust, and a quiet joy that he had helped her survive and regain her strength. He nodded gently, replying with a calm smile. Though words were limited, their bond was unshakable. Actions had spoken louder than speech. Kindness, care, and patience had built a connection stronger than he could have imagined. As evening approached, the elders guided them back to the small campsite. They gestured to John, indicating that he had fulfilled his responsibilities with respect and integrity. The girl was healthy, her wounds healing, and her strength restored. John felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but also humility. He realized that true responsibility was not about authority or control, but about care, understanding, and respect for others. He had learned this lesson in the harsh desert, guided by the girl's resilience and the tribe's wisdom. The night fell gently over the desert, stars glittering like tiny diamonds against the dark sky. John sat quietly by the fire, the girl resting nearby, and reflected on the journey they had shared. A simple act, offering water to a wounded girl, had transformed into an extraordinary story of trust, learning, and human connection. He thought about the tribe's customs, the lessons from the elders, and the quiet strength of the girl who had taught him so much without words. He understood now that every act of kindness carried responsibility, every gesture carried meaning, and every choice shaped the lives of those around him. John's thoughts turned to the future. He would leave the desert eventually, return to his own life, and continue his travels. But he knew that this experience would remain with him forever. The lessons of patience, respect, and cultural understanding would guide him in every future encounter. He had learned that trust is fragile, earned through consistent effort, and that compassion, even in its simplest form, can create bonds that transcend language, culture, and circumstance. The girl stirred and opened her eyes, looking at John with quiet affection. She reached out and held his hand briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement and connection. John squeezed her hand gently, understanding the depth of unspoken communication between them. In that moment, he realized that he did not need formal words or declarations to understand the bond they shared. It was built on trust, care, and the shared experience of survival and learning. As the fire burned low and the desert night deepened, John felt a profound sense of peace. The girl was safe, healthy, and surrounded by her tribe. He had honored the responsibility that had been entrusted to him, and he had learned lessons that would guide him for the rest of his life. The desert, once a place of isolation and challenge, had become a teacher, a place where compassion, patience, and respect revealed their true power. The elders spoke quietly among themselves, and John sensed approval in their tone. He had not only protected the girl, but had also shown respect for their customs and traditions. The bond formed through care and understanding had been honored, and the trust they placed in him had been validated through his actions. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for their guidance and wisdom, realizing that he had been part of something much larger than himself. As the first light of dawn began to touch the desert horizon, John packed his supplies quietly, careful not to disturb the girl or the elders. She stood beside him, now strong and steady on her feet. The elders watched silently, their faces calm but filled with meaning. John knew that it was time to continue his journey, but he also knew that the lessons he had learned here, the power of kindness, the depth of responsibility, and the beauty of cultural understanding, would remain with him forever. Before departing, the girl approached John and placed a small bundle of herbs in his hands. She spoke softly, her words a mixture of her language and gestures he had begun to understand. He realized that she was giving him a gift of trust and gratitude, a symbol of the connection they shared and the lessons they had learned together. He nodded, accepting the gift with reverence, understanding its meaning far beyond its material value. With one final glance at the girl and the elders, John mounted his horse. He looked at the desert, stretching endlessly before him, and felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for leaving a place that had changed him so deeply, and hope for the future, carrying with him the wisdom, compassion, and understanding he had gained. The girl waved gently, her eyes reflecting trust and confidence in him, and John waved back, a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary journey they had shared. As he rode into the horizon, John reflected on the journey, the chance encounter, the life-saving act, the cultural lessons, and the bond with the girl. He knew that he had grown in ways he could never have imagined, that kindness and respect could forge connections stronger than words, and that even the simplest actions could carry profound consequences. The desert, once a place of challenge and uncertainty, had become a place of learning, trust, and transformation. John's heart was full as he disappeared into the distance, the desert sun rising behind him, casting long shadows over the sand. The girl, strong and healthy, remained with her tribe, safe and cared for, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of human connection. And though their paths had diverged, the bond they had formed through compassion, patience, and respect would remain, a story of trust, learning, and the quiet power of kindness that could change lives forever.